There's a story about a student at Cambridge University in England who entered the classroom on exam day and asked the professor to bring him cakes and ale. The professor refused, expressing astonishment at the young student's audacity. At this point, the student read from the 400-year-old laws of Cambridge, written in Latin and still somewhat in effect. The passage read by the student stated, "Gentlemen sitting for examinations may request and require cakes and ale." The professor was forced to comply. Pepsi and hamburgers were deemed the modern equivalent, and so the necessary accommodations were made for the student. After all, the law was on his side. 3 weeks later, the student was summoned to the Office of Academic Affairs and fined $7.50. Essentially, that was the cost of the meal. But you see, he was not fined for demanding cakes and ale, but for blatantly disregarding another obscure Cambridge law. He had failed to wear a sword to the examination. While funny, and most likely a legend, there is a bizarre truth to this story. Higher education seems to be holding on to the past. For example, our professors are teaching, but are the students learning? Teaching versus learning, not the same thing. So Larry Spence from Penn State University crafted the case against teaching, and it goes like this. A 12th century farmer would only recognize the cows in a modern dairy. A 13th century physician would run screaming from a modern operating room. Galileo could only gape in wonder touring NASA's Johnson Space Center. Columbus would be terrified of a nuclear submarine. But a 15th century professor would feel right at home in most classrooms. Yep. To emphasize this point, I actually found a woodcut of a classroom from the 15th century. And here's a modern classroom. Not much different. And in fact, usually this leads to this. So the question is, has higher education advanced in 600 years? Sure, we've gained laptop computing, comfortable seating, whiteboards, cozy study spaces, air conditioning, and importantly, indoor plumbing. But if our classroom consists of lectures, traditional homework, and exams, then we're actually just teaching about information. There are two issues with teaching information. First, if you had to guess, what percentage of key concepts do students recall 5 years out of the classroom? What percentage would you give it?
0.
Let's hear some zero, right? And an informal poll of professors, it ranges from 50% to apparently 0%. But in reality, it is actually 2%. It's not that much different than 0, is it? So, this is not quite a fair statistic. This would be like if I walked up to a student 5 years after she took my course, and I said, "What's the Colebrook equation solve?" Now, sure, she could go to a textbook and look it up and then certainly use it. But that's the whole point, is if we're lecturing, we're teaching about information. That leads to the second issue. Couldn't the student just ask AI to assist with the Colebrook equation? With AI only getting brighter and brighter, there's no reason for us to actually focus on the information anymore. Now, don't get me wrong, technical competence is absolutely necessary. If you're a civil engineer designing a bridge, you'll have to apply your knowledge of load distribution. If you're a financial advisor, you're going to have to know and understand the tax laws. But here's the bigger, harder question. What's the point in mastering these skills if it doesn't lead or doesn't translate into positive, meaningful contributions to society? That's the gap. That's what's missing. So alongside skill set education, we need mindset education. Now, by mindset, I'm actually talking about that inner compass that guides how knowledge is applied. It's the habit of thought that shapes not only what students can do, but what they choose to do with it. Mindset education is not just about shaping the knowledge, but how they use that knowledge to become decision makers, problem solvers, and citizens. Now, there are a lot of different types of mindsets, and I would like to emphasize 4 of them. Number 1, uncovering opportunities to create value. Students are actually trained to just solve a problem that they are handed. But in the real world, people are struggling. Communities are lacking resources. Systems are inefficient. Value creation comes from noticing opportunities. Number 2, embracing lifelong learning. Technology is advancing at such a rapid pace, and information is just growing and growing. The graduate that thinks that learning ends with their diploma is already obsolete. Number 3, considering the ethical implications of decisions. Just because we can design something doesn't mean that we should. Technologies like facial recognition, gene editing, autonomous weapons, these are not just technical challenges, they're ethical minefields. If we don't train our students to weigh the consequences, we risk unleashing powerful tools without moral direction. And number 4, taking responsibility for one's decisions. Mindset education is not just about owning the successes, but also owning the real-world impact of your choices. When one of my mechanical engineering students graduates, which of the following is the more likely scenario? Scenario A. The power plant foreman finds Bobby sitting at his desk, and he says, "Open your textbook to page 562. A stainless steel pipe was replaced yesterday with an 8-inch cast iron pipe. You'll have to use the mechanical energy equation to solve the losses to match a pump characteristic curve to match a new pump to the pipe system." Or scenario B. The power plant foreman finds Bobby sitting at his desk, and he says, "Electricity production dropped overnight. Let's figure it out." Yeah, scenario B, right? Because in the real world, we're not handed a problem. We're given a mess. We have to be discoverers to untangle that mess and figure out the problem. During World War II, researchers at the Office for Naval Analysis faced a critical problem. Many aircraft were being shot down while engaging in bombing missions over Germany. They knew they needed hard data to be able to decrease the attrition. Many of the bombers that made it back to the base were riddled with bullet and projectile holes. So as they collected the data, they began to set it up, and a pattern began to emerge. You'll notice that the majority of the damage occurred to the wings, the body of the aircraft, and at the tail. So the solution seemed clear. Reinforce those damaged areas with thicker armor plating. After reinforcing these bombers, the exact same number of aircraft continued to be shot down. Abraham Wald, who had fled Nazi-occupied Austria, reviewed the data, and he noticed a critical flaw. These were the planes that had made it back to base. Missing from the data was all the bombers that were shot down. The key was to reinforce the areas that showed no damage. Notice the lack of damage in the cockpit, the engines, and at the tail connections. The result was fewer fatalities and more aircraft returning to base. Abraham Wald's sense of discovery led him to the real problem. Are we actually giving our students the opportunity to be discoverers, to be curious, to find the opportunities, to create value, and ultimately have impact? Well, how would we do this? In a traditional fluid mechanics course like I teach, we might ask the student to evaluate a pipe system, figure out the losses, plug the numbers into an equation, check the pump efficiency, submit the homework. They get a 95%, great job. But what if we reimagine that assignment? What if instead of calculate the pressure loss, the professor described a drought-stricken village in need of an upgraded pipe system? powered by a pump. The pipes are aging, energy costs are rising, and if the pump fails, the community will have no water. The student must consider and must evaluate that original pipe system, propose improvements, and then weigh the economic and environmental trade-offs of such a system. Suddenly, it's the same equations take a whole new light. Instead of calculating numbers, the students are now creating impact for human possibilities. They must consider, what value does this create for the community? How will it hold up in the long run? And what are the risks involved in the design decisions that I've made? As educators, it's our responsibility not just to train our students how to solve, but why to solve and for whom. The students will become, instead of calculators of numbers, creators of impact. So what effect has this actually had on skill set education? Adding in mindset, what has that done for skill set? So I actually assign a 5-week team-based design project every semester. And it is similar to the scenario that I just gave on pipe flow. Near the conclusion of that design project, each individual student takes an exam on pipe flow. Over 8 terms, there's a 21% increase in the grade on the exams covering the pipe flow material than on all the other material in my course. The reason is because that material mattered to society, and the students were more eager to learn it and retain it. Now, with that said, what's the number one issue I hear from other educators? I already have too much to teach. How am I supposed to add more? My response? Mindset education is not about adding content. It's not about extra content. It's about reframing the content that we already teach. It's not extra time. It's a different lens. The challenges of the 21st century require more than technical competence. Cybersecurity, sustainable energy, climate change, food security, these are not homework problems. They're messy, interconnected problems that are human problems. And solving them requires not only smart minds, but wise minds. Speaking of messy, interconnected human problems, when we assign these types of problems, the students actually have to unravel this mess. They have to unravel the curiosities, and it actually gives them more self-directed learning. The classroom will be transformed from this to this. Instead of being a sage on the stage, be a guide on the side, because actionable, transferable learning happens in messy contexts. So that returns us to the opening question. Has higher education really advanced since the 15th century? Technologically, absolutely. Pedagogically, partially. The real leap forward is when we finally fully integrate mindset education with skill set education. The measure of a graduate is not just what they know, but it's how they use that knowledge to create value, to keep learning, to act ethically, and to take responsibility. If we redesign learning with mindset at its core, we will not only graduate competent professionals, but we will produce leaders that are eager and ready and willing to face the challenges of our century with courage, wisdom, and purpose. We do call it higher education. Let's make it that way. Thank you.